Hello, welcome to Skill of the Week Ceramics Part 2. So we are coming back to show you what the clay looks like when it has properly evaporated into the mold and ready to be poured out. So I'm going to move the camera down so you can see this little skin has formed around the outside edge, and you can see the little puddle of slip inside. So this is ready to be poured out. And this has also formed a nice little skin around the outside. It's about 1/8 of an inch thick or so, I would say, and that's ready to be poured out. The other one is not quite ready, so we're going to wait to pour that one. Okay, because it's a container, it's a lidded box, so you definitely want it to have a little bit more strength in the structure. So on this one, it's going to be really easy to pour out. I actually don't want to pour it where the rubber bands are. So you can hear it coming out. You don't want to shake it, you just want to let it drip, and there wasn't much left in there because a lot of it had evaporated into, or the moisture had evaporated into the plaster, because plaster naturally draws moisture away from the clay. So it's not dripping anymore, so that one's ready to just sit and dry. This one, I hope I didn't wait too long because the hole looks like it's almost too small to pour out of. Okay, not too bad. It sounds like it's coming out pretty good. You can see a nice steady flow is coming out. And you want to just let it sit and drip out. Now, I'm going to prop this up on some boards so that it can just drip out, because I don't want to flip it up and then have a big puddle of something else in there. Now, notice I'm rocking it, but I'm not shaking it. Shaking it could make the structure pull away from the plaster mold, and then you'd have this misshapen object, and you don't want that to happen. Now, it doesn't appear that it's dripping anymore, so I'm just going to set it out here. Okay? Now, I'm going to adjust these. I'm going to look at this and see if it's close. Okay, I'm going to move the camera so you can see what I'm seeing. Okay, so on this, if I move it, you can see that a skin is forming around the outside edge. Let's see where the best area is. Probably over here. You can see it a little bit better. But it's still pretty thin, and that's just because this is an older mold, so it's going to take a little while. I'm going to let it sit a little bit longer, and we'll check the other ones and see if they're ready to come out. Now, we can take the rubber spatula and peel off all of this excess, and that just keeps the mold nice and clean while we wait for it to come off of there. And just handle them gently. You want to take care of your molds because they can last for years and years and years. This one, it's a little bit moist, but if I pull on it, if I just rub my finger on it, it's not just pulling, oops, I'm sorry. If I rub my finger on it like this, it's not just easily pulling away from the plaster. So that tells me it's still trying to dry. And we don't want to try to force it to dry, like stick it in front of a fan or use a hairdryer or anything like that, because it can cause certain areas to dry faster than others, and then it can stick to the mold, and you don't want that to happen. So let's just check this one. And sometimes it's easier to use this and see if it peels away easily. And it does not peel away easily, so it's going to take a little bit longer. We're just going to let it sit. Check this again. I think I'm going to go ahead and try it just for the sake of example. And I'm going to set these on the edge of the bucket so that I can pour out easily. I'm going to just go ahead. I'm not going to use this again, so I'm pouring it back in. Any excess stuff you can just pour back in there, and we'll clean that up in a little bit. So I'm going to pull this over so I can really have good control over it. Now, these larger molds can be really difficult. I personally like to have the bucket on the floor so I have a little more control. I don't have to lift it up too high. So that's where we're going to be pouring, is on the floor. Okay, I think what I'm going to do is move this first board, maybe both, just because I get sloppy and I don't want to pour it all over the place. Okay, so I'm going to rest it on the edge here. Ooh. Be really careful. Ooh, it's about dumping on me. And actually, it's pretty big. It could almost fit right on the bucket if I wanted to support it on the edges here. But I'm kind of nervous about leaving it like that. I'm going to hang on to it and just make sure that it's not dripping anymore before you lift it up. I like to let it sit there for a little while, just because you don't want, especially in a container, you don't want to have drips coming down the sides. It just kind of doesn't look very good. But if you're concerned about it being just the size of the bucket, I would definitely use the wood to support it on. Some molds are large enough that you can just set it right on the bucket and let it sit there and drip for a long time. But these that are really close to the same size, I like to hang on to them or support them or something like that. Okay, this is not dripping anymore. It's been a really long time since it dripped. So I'm going to very carefully pick it up and just set it down. Oh, and it does look really nice. Okay, and while those things are drying, I can start putting things away. And what I like to do is use the rubber spatula to get as much of the slip out of the pitcher as possible. And just get in the habit of cleaning everything up as you're waiting for things. It's much more efficient use of time, and then you don't forget anything. Because in the past, I've had people forget to clean buckets up, and then you have to scrub them, and then you have to wash them down the sink, and it causes clogs and things like that. So we want to just try to get everything as wiped out, cleaned up as possible. Okay, so I like to take a few paper towels, and so that we don't get clogs and stuff like that, wipe as much of this out as possible. If it can't get into the bucket, it's going to go down the sink anyway, so we might as well wipe it up with paper towels. So that's pretty clean. I mean, it's not perfect, obviously, because I can't get all of it off. But for the most part, I got all the clay out. Now, I might be using the word clay and slip interchangeably because, honestly, it is clay. It's just liquid clay that slip is. So okay, so those are ready to be washed. And when you wash these, let the water run a really long time because we haven't got all the clay out. So we want to try to get it washed down the sink as far as possible. And I'll just set those in there for now. And I can wipe these off. I should have wiped the wooden spoon off while I had the chance, but I can still do it now. It's still pretty wet. And I'll still be using this rubber spatula, so. Because now this is dry enough that I can peel off this excess clay. And we want to try and keep this cleaned up so we don't have to use wet sponges and things like that. Because when you use wet things to clean up molds, you can actually damage the detail in the mold. Now this bowl or this lidded box is not going to have a lot of detail in it, but things that do have detail, like sculptures of teddy bears or whatever, they have nice little details of hair and things like that. So you don't want to wipe those out a lot. You want to try to have a nice clean pull of the ceramic object out of the mold so that it just keeps it fairly clean as we're working with it. This looks like it's going to be really nice. It's got a nice thickness to it, so it's going to support the lid. It's going to hold a good shape. You definitely don't want to pour them so that they're so thin that they collapse on you. Okay, so make sure that this is pretty clean. This is my favorite rubber spatula because it's got a little more stiffness to it, and it'll peel the clay off a little bit more easily than that other one. The other one you kind of have to really hang on to it. Okay, so we're gonna let that sit and dry a little bit, and we'll check these other ones. Now this is dry clay, so I'm gonna put it in the recycle tub because you don't want the dry clay to go back in there. Okay, since I've cleaned everything up, I can use my spatula to go ahead and incorporate any of that clay that I just threw in there into the slip so that it can become part of the slip again. Okay, so we're going to put this bucket down. Want to make sure it's nice and sealed so that no air gets to it. It's pretty heavy, so please be careful when you're lifting it. Okay, and we're going to check out this one because this one looked like it was maybe a little bit more ready. Oh, and I forgot, I got to have my rubber spatula. Okay, this one, it's close. So I'm going to just try it just to see. Okay, you can take off your rubber bands. Now I'm going to just very carefully, ooh, look at that. It worked. There is my little baby Jesus mold, and it's hollow inside. Now, to take this off the rest of the way, you have to be super careful, or you can damage the clay or damage the sculpture. Now, if it doesn't come off easily, you can sometimes shake it and it'll work. Oh, it loosened a little bit. Sometimes you just have to let it dry a little bit more. Yeah, it's still sticking in there pretty good, but it pulled off one side really nicely. So we're just going to let this sit and dry over here, and it'll probably pop out of there pretty easily. Now let's check out this one. It's still pretty squishy. Oh, I don't know, maybe it's pulling. See how it's starting to pull away? Right there, you can see a little bit inside. Okay, so we're going to try this one too. Okay, and we might only get one side of it, but at least you'll be able to see what it looks like when it comes off. Okay, carefully pulling the rubber bands off. Now, I'm going to go ahead and just to give myself a little bit more stress-free pulling this off, I'm going to pull that away a little. And I'm going to carefully, ooh, look at that. I tore it. It lifted a little bit too easily, but what happened was, I'm going to come over here and show you. I didn't allow it to be lifted off slowly, and I tore it. And it was a little too thin, it looks like. But carefully pulling this out, at least you can see what this little guy is supposed to look like. Okay, so this is the mold. Okay, now you can see right here, it's a really good example. The clay is really squishy right now. How thin this is. I didn't allow this to dry long enough in the mold, so it's really just paper thin. Okay, so it needed to be thicker to hold up this larger structure. This little tiny baby Jesus, it has less surface area to hold up, so I was able to pour that out a little faster. This one should have held up or should have waited a little bit longer. So I'm going to stop there because I know that this bowl, this lidded box, is not ready to be pulled out. So we're going to let that dry a little bit longer, and I'll show you the results when you get to class.